Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Ready or Not. Today we're talking about something incredibly important, and that is the making of a man. Let's get into it.
So that second thing you brought up was ownership. And man, I was just the other day, yesterday actually, trying to explain taking ownership and responsibility to my 9-year-old.
All right.
He got this new, like, really cool foxtail looking thing for his birthday.
Okay.
And my 7-year-old tucked it in his pants and was running around, and they were playing tag, like, go catch the fox in the backyard. And when they were done, it got left out in the backyard. They went inside, and a couple minutes later, the dog's ripping it all to shreds.
Oh, my goodness.
And my 9-year-old's like just devastated. Oh, my new thing. Brother, how could you have left it out there? You know, and he wanted to blame everybody else but himself. And I said, Bud, that's your toy. If you really cared about it being safe, it's your responsibility to make sure it gets put away.
There you go.
And he fought that for so long, but you could see the more I reminded him, it was just sinking in. Okay, it's mine. I need to make sure if my brother is playing with it and I know he's playing with it, then I need to be the one to make sure it gets put away.
That's an awesome example of, I think, something that's human nature for sure, but also maybe a bit of a plague of our current times is the blame game.
Mm-hmm.
I see it everywhere. And maybe I'm hypersensitive to it, but I don't think I am. I think it's just an observation that as soon as something goes wrong, it's not, okay, what happened? What could we do better, different? Next time, how can we solve this? It's whose fault was it?
Mm-hmm.
And we go straight into detective mode.
Yeah.
And really the goal isn't because we care enough to find out who did it. The whole point is we want to blame everyone other than ourselves. And that's the opposite of ownership. Now, I was watching an interview that a bunch of businessmen were doing a couple months ago, and they talked about the most successful leaders and entrepreneurs in business are not always the most intellectual, but they're the ones who don't want to blame, they want to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're in a meeting and maybe your company just lost $1 million or the ad didn't go well or whatever it is. There was a slip, trip, and spill in the warehouse. They don't go down this whodunit kind of game. It's, all right, guys, how do we fix the problem? Immediately remove the blame. But you think of the impact of that. When someone takes ownership, right? Now, they're not flogging themselves. Ownership isn't, I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, it's all my fault, I'm a loser. It's just taking the fact that, hey, this is mine to own. So what do we do with it? It opens the opportunity to improve whatever the situation is, whether that's business or family or school or sports. But it also frees everyone else to be engaged in the solution-finding experience. Mm-hmm. And in a family, we've gone through seasons of this where someone leaves out the milk overnight on accident and now it's chunky, or the towels didn't get folded. It's, who left the towels out? Who left the milk out? And you can just create such a negative atmosphere if you're not careful that pretty soon it's not fun to be home. It's not a safe place or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so something the Lord had to convict me of deeply was to take ownership of our home. Even when our kids were younger, teaching them ownership, but not giving away my role. I'm dad.
Yep.
It's my responsibility at the end of the day. I'm teaching them ownership, but I have to take ownership. And the funny example, I was getting just wound up. They were leaving their, and look, they're so little. I don't know why we get so wound up when they're so little. But their sweatshirts were being left in the hallway. Their socks were on the couch. Their backpack was on the table. And I was like, they don't even help each other. And the Lord convicted me instantly. And I was in the back patio complaining to myself and the Lord, they should at least help each other. And the Lord was like, when's the last time you picked up their socks? Or you picked up their jacket? And I was like, oh. And so stepping back into that, taking ownership to model ownership was huge.
Yep, 100%.
Now, there's the blame game. There's deflection. What do you think drives people from taking ownership? What is it about the natural man that doesn't want to take responsibility.
Man, I mean, you think of the first sin in the garden. I mean, it was Adam blaming Eve for what happened when he was there the whole time, and God was the one that told him, "Don't eat of that tree," and he took zero ownership or responsibility of that situation. So that's just a sin that seems to be in the DNA of humanity.
Yep.
But I mean, it does not have to stay that way.
Sure.
At all. It's so easy to want to blame other people because it makes us feel good. I mean, when it's not our fault, we don't have to confront the fact that we're not perfect.
Sure.
And so I think once you can take accountability for your own actions, it's easier to take ownership of what the results are.
Absolutely. You even just said something that made me think of like the root of pride a little bit. Because if I admit that this was my responsibility, then I'm admitting I'm imperfect. I think was the word you just used.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we are imperfect. And we'll sit around the table and be like, we're all imperfect, bro. And like, but then it's time to own your imperfections, and we won't.
Nope.
And so absolutely accepting the fact that you're imperfect and then taking your pride and crucifying it, drowning it in righteousness
Yeah.
is so huge. Like, get over yourself. You're going to mess up. And teaching our boys, like, hey, knock it off. Like, you're going to blow it. And that's okay, as long as you're willing to repent and take ownership.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, one of the most incredible things the Bible talks about. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. Right? You can't be liberated unless you are first taken captive.
Yeah.
You can be free without being liberated, but you can't be liberated without being first
taken.
captive.
Yeah.
And we've been taken captive by our sin nature, but the Lord wants to liberate us from that. And so you don't have to let pride make you defensive or the blame game. And so when our kids look, and whether it's grandkids, nephews, whatever it is, we want to see these boys turn into what we talk about, independent young men and old men. But we also want to see them take ownership, because out of ownership comes health. Always. I've never seen a man take ownership for his life and have an unhealthy surrounding.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Well, ownership, I mean, it creates opportunity for growth, right? Because taking ownership means, okay, I was lacking in this area. So what can I do to grow and learn so this doesn't happen again? I was listening to somebody talk about ownership, and it was more of a business related situation, but there's a manager who's complaining about their employees not taking ownership and being on time, or getting their reports turned in, or having errors on the numbers. And this perspective that this guy gave was, well, the manager needs to look himself in the mirror and say, I'm bad at hiring. I didn't need to take ownership that I hired that person, not that they're failing. So how can I become better at hiring and training my employees? So it's the same thing in the home. It's if your kids are flailing, take ownership. What can I do to help reel them in, help give them structure, and point them in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're threading the needle here a little bit, because you can become overly demanding and harsh and militaristic with your kids. I don't think we're as threatened by that. That exists. There are moms or dads who have way too high of expectations and maybe need to throttle down and go do what Jesus told the Pharisees to do. Go learn what mercy is.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it seems like there's such a soft, gentle, timid approach to parenting where excuses are given for our kids all the time. I've seen kids punch other kids or pull hair. It's like, oh, they didn't really mean it. Like, they didn't mean it. They made a fist and they punched a kid. They absolutely meant it. But they're hearing, you talked about this in the beginning, mom and dad modeling it. They're hearing from mom and dad excuses and no lack of ownership. we can't do that. We can't make excuses for our kids because then they'll become excuse makers.
Yeah.
When we take ownership for our kids, then they eventually will take ownership for themselves.
Yeah.
So important. And so independence and ownership, but how do we teach that to our kids, right? These two different things. This is going to sound silly, but I think there's opportunities every day to infuse independence and ownership into our kids' lives. Even from the time our kids were like 4 years old, if they could talk, they had to order their own food at the restaurants. They had to look the waiter or waitress in the face. And I mean, sometimes it was a whisper because they're so intimidated. Chicken nuggets. Like,
Right.
yeah, but hey, you don't say it, you don't eat. That's just how it's going to work. And it's wild now, our kids being 18, 16, trickling down from there. A compliment we get often. And look, they're going to have to choose to follow the Lord on their own. But a natural characteristic they have that we've been told often is, man, your kids, they look me in the face, they shake my hand, they can have a conversation, and they can engage at a young age with adults. And that was not on accident. That was absolutely intentionally developed. When, where, how, what class? Oh, no. The restaurant, that 10 seconds of awkwardness. They had to order their own mac and cheese. or, oh, what'd you do? You broke something? We're going to go over to the neighbor and you're going to tell the neighbor what you did.
Yeah.
Take, again, ownership. You want to eat? Own it. You broke something? Own it. You did something wrong? Own it.
I love that example because the biggest thing, and me and my wife talk about this, is how can we model ownership? And it's owning our sin. When we screw up, are we going to get down on our knees, look at our kids eye to eye, and say, "Mom and Dad screwed up. We're sorry. Can you please forgive us?" And then it transitions to when they hurt each other, and they go say sorry. And sometimes the brother will say, "Oh, that's okay," and we say, "No, it's not okay. You can say I forgive you."
Oh, perfect.
But he needs to know that what he did was wrong.
Very, very good job. That is to the T how to handle that stuff. And imagine a young boy grows up, gets married. Ladies, think of this. Don't you want this? When your husband messes up, he can look you in the face and say, "I'm sorry, will you forgive me?" Oh my gosh. But that's learned early.
Yep.
Or it's learned hard later. So let's help our kids out and teach them young how to be independent and how to take ownership.